Hello, everyone. Welcome to this hybrid conversation session, Decentring Wax Print Discussions, Production, Marketing, and Consumption in West Africa, held here at the International Institute for Asian Studies Conference Room here in Leiden, the Netherlands, by the Humanities Across Borders program. My name is Joaquin Labus, the Web Content Coordinator here for HAB, and an early career researcher at IIAS. So for those joining us here for the first time, one of the goals of IIAS as an institute is to facilitate interdisciplinary trans-regional work in and beyond Asia. And through educational research initiatives like Humanities Across Borders, we do this by bringing into dialogue scholars, administrators, practitioners from different continents, focusing on diverse, unexpected, oftentimes transgressive strategies of knowledge production and exchange. It is in this collaborative and open space that we invite everyone joining here today and to our audience online to take part in today's conversation. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about today's structure. So each of our speakers will share short presentations on their perspective on African wax print, followed by a conversation between them along a few common themes or provocations that emerge. So this session is being recorded, but only the speakers will be in view. So the chat box will be open throughout this conversation. So for our online audience, please feel free to type in the chat box any questions or comments you have, and they'll be read out when the discussion is open up to everybody. So with that, I give the floor to my colleague and academic director of HAB, R.T. Kolra, to say a few words about how the conversation came together and the rationale behind having such conversation in the first place. So RT, please.
Thank you, Joaquin. So welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us. To Joaquin's question as to how this wax print conversation, African print conversation came about, it's a very old story, but there's also a very recent one that started in Dakar in Senegal, when IIAS's Africa, Asia, a new axis of knowledge conference was held in Senegal, in Dakar, where we chanced upon an entire archive of wax print samples. They were sample books. I think there were at least 50 such books, bigger than, I think bigger than a table, a desk. And we saw this and we thought, what is going on here? Because nobody really knew in Senegal, in Dakar, the person who had them in her custody, where they came from. All she knew that it was part of the archive, the technological archive and design archive of a company, which was a Senegalese company, but it was originally a European company. So there was a kind of mystery around this. And I contacted our colleague, Jody Benjamin, who's a historian, and we started thinking about this. And that's when I met Malika, who was also, who's a speaker here today, but she's been a curator and a researcher in Ghana on exactly the same thing, on wax prints. And then when I come back to Leiden and I'm back in IIAS, here in this building, which is the Humanities building, I bump into Adwoa, who's she's the researcher and fellow here at the Africa Studies Center, who are our neighbors at the Asian Studies Center Institute, where we are. And I realized that she's also working on wax print, again from Ghana. So it was a conversation waiting to happen, and that's why we are here together. The third person who's part of this conversation, who's the curator of South Asia collections at the World Museum here in the Netherlands, she couldn't come in today because of some emergency, but she was part of the initial framing of this discussion. All three are curators, researchers, also looking at exhibition making. So with that, I wanted to just give you this background. And also my own interest in this is also because I'm also looking at transnational histories of cloth, how they get imbricated with authenticity, provenance, patrimony, who owns which design, whose heritage, the question we all ask, whose heritage? And then it runs up with the history of capitalism, the history of global commerce and global markets, and European companies in the fray. So this is something that we all are, thinking about. And the question is, our goal is to bring these people together to ask why this wax printed cloth, this African print, why is it so contested? Why is it being so debated about? And who are the people and who are the stakeholders who are involved in this conversation? And in order to open this much debated Pandora's box, we are pleased to have with us Adwoa, who's a research fellow at the Center for Cultural and African Studies at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. Sorry, it's a long one, out of breath, in Ghana. And then there's Malika Kraamer, who's the affiliate researcher at the Global Heritage Lab at the University of Bonn in Germany. And she also teaches in the UK at the University of Leicester. So both, as I said, are speakers who are interested in, they're researchers, they're curators, but they're also interested in reclaiming Africa's crucial role in shaping, adapting, and sustaining wax print fabrics as a cultural, economic resource throughout West Africa. So with that, I invite Malika to open the conversation with the presentation of your own research and to put it in conversation with Adwoa later. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. Yes, I'm actually from the Netherlands, from Rotterdam. I wanted to put your attention on this book. It's published this year. It's a comic strip, and it's called Wax Paradoxes. Written by Justin Saul, written and designed. And why do I put attention on this? Because it so sits in our you see a little bit. So this comic strip really discusses the cultural complexity of wax, the controversies, as wax really sparks a lot of debates, wax prints on cultural ownership, on power relations embedded in these fabrics, hence around belonging, identity, decoloniality, appropriation, heritage. Like when I gave some years ago, 2018, I was wearing a dress in wax print by one famous fashion designer who made it as a present to me, and I'm very touched. So I wanted to show it off, and I showed people this as well. And when I showed this, and I asked my audience in Yogyakarta, where's this from? Of course, my whole audience said, this is from Indonesia. I said, no. It's from Ghana. Just bought it in Accra. And then somebody said, yes, it is a bit odd. The design is upside down. So I said, yeah, and actually this cloth probably is produced in China. Because I couldn't see the sleeve. If you buy wax, you always can see it on the side. And often that gives you a clue where your particular wax might have been printed. So if they're saying here, currently block print African fabric, and I would not be surprised if somewhere we can find a baguette.
Guaranteed, yeah.
Nigeria? No, I think this is China. More a big part from Japan. So could have been produced in Europe, could have been produced in Africa, could have been produced in China. People recognize it as Indonesian, as African, and so on. So was this whole belonging, is it purely in the direction of the design? That's just a little bit thing to think about. Okay. And go to the next one. So when people discuss African wax cloth, African, not African, is it colonial to wear it or not? Or is it actually an act of decoloniality? Who is allowed to wear it? Some of my friends in Ghana are quite sad that I don't wear wax cloths much more here. But for many people over here, and also for some people, especially in the city, me as a white Dutch person, when I put on a cloth like that, I am completely I'm cultural appropriating. And some people get very upset, and I do understand that as well. So I do think when to put on what, where, and what it signifies to myself, to others. And that's complex, and that's what I think we enjoy in a discussion like today and to understand. So these are, I'm giving these little examples, and these are the things we are thinking about, we are discussing. But also what we wanted to do, and actually I wrote that beautifully down when in the abstract on it, is when we read around wax prints, often the focus is on the European factories, on the origin story, and even that we can question. And in that writing, which I have been culpable as well, if you look at, for instance, this one, it's an entry on wax prints, which I wrote. Everybody's going on the techniques and what they lay and Prevenair and the Harlem Cotton Company and Flisco, etc. So today we also want to decenter the way we discuss this. So there are a lot of layers, I think, in what we are trying to do today. And then in the end, Adwoa, we came together, something like, how do we do at least one thing simple? Okay, I do the past, you do the present. So a lot of the things I just want, actually I will go into much more detail. So myself, I explored wax prints for the last 30 years, but mainly alongside hand-woven textiles in especially West Africa, within a global framework, the transnationality of these textiles, but also their place and shifting roles in complex fashion systems in West Africa. I spoke about Yogyakarta, and the next slide, one before. So that was my presentation in Yogyakarta, framing it. This was 2018, I believe. I also wrote a whole article on here on the Japanese sari and the wax prints, and really questioning why are we so hung up and how do people use place in heritage making, in identity making, in belonging, because Japanese saris are firmly stuff from India, but people also show up, and it's important to show that it was produced in Japan. Does that undermine the idea that it belongs to Indian nuts? This is very big. I live long in Leicester, where 40% of the people at least understand Gujarati. And the same thing I come on with wax print. So these questions we raised today, I've been busy with it. It has been fascinated me for a long time. And fashion posters, away from the margin, and their role in the co-creation of fashion. Because these you find all over Ghana. Okay, let's go. So I go to the past. Not a little bit is on the BBC, what I found, but also that we don't, these discussions, we put them in new bags and we give a little perspective. But in the 1990s or in the 1980s, some discussions have been around. This is the work of Yinka Shonibari, who I think really was very instrumental, that many people started to understand that these wax prints have a global histories and also its colonial heritages that are also embedded in these flow. Next slide, please. Okay, let's go to Indonesia and Java. And I know West Africa very well. I've only been once in Indonesia. So for those, if I may, do correct me if needed. But batik, Java batik has been around for many, many centuries. There's lots of debates where it started, connections with India, and that itself is a beautiful, complex history. In the 19th century, what happened that in discussions about what it means to be from Java, what it means from the archipelago, thank you, that's a word I always trip over. Changes, identity, belonging became more debated, but also what happened that a wider group of people there were able to wear batik, sorry. Here we see people from the elite. This is all from the World Museum here. I thought to make that connection, as Priya was supposed to be here. And here we see somebody, a working class person who, and we see the batik. These are all late 19th, early 20th century. So, and then that story that a lot of us are familiar with are coming in. At that time, it was colonized by the Dutch, for a little time by the British, who got the first idea to take some batik samples and let's see if we can do something and mechanize it and make it cheaper. A story that has been around, imitation of cloth. It happens through the centuries in many places in the world. So I think it's always important to keep in mind. Next slide. I will go over this. Why things are called Java prints, and Java prints in the 19th century meant something different than in the 20th century. I think I skip it, so let's continue. So you get some companies in the Netherlands, and then again with their monopoly with Java, and they have access to the designs and textiles there, who started to experiment how can we produce batik or batik as it was also called mechanically. And in the first instance, the first samples, it was not color fast, it faded, nobody liked it. And then quite soon by mid 19th century, there was a market for in Europe, but also in Java. And often people forget that part. For a short time, the difference between the handmade batik and the mechanized batik was big enough to see for everybody clear the difference. And there was also a huge gap in price. And it meant that those very cheap ink was also available for people with very little money. Then in Java something happened. I forgot the precise name, but also in many cloth production centers, also if you do it by hand, you see this in Ghana, we see it in Indonesia, that they could make it quicker. You have this which made that more batik made locally in Java was available for more, and actually then the demand and the interest in the stuff that was produced in the Netherlands collapsed. And there's actually only one, there's happened a lot, one survives kind of and was kind of safe, the Haarlem Cotton Company, because in the process of making those wax, you got this variegated effect, that it looks a little bit of a sparkle in your cloth. And that fitted very well in lots in West Africa, where that kind of aesthetic was already part of local cloth traditions. So the market, what was produced in Europe shifted to West Africa. There's shitloads speculated and thought of how that exactly happened. But the most simple reason, which anybody in Ghana is, Ghana, okay, I'd skip a little bit how, of course, everybody is copying everybody and you get all kinds of things happening. And just to see 1866, the Garuda ring, and I think it's Lar called in Indonesia itself. You see it in all kinds of forms up till today. So in designs, how things, I always like to tell stories as a curator through the materials that I brought all kinds of things, but let's continue. Here, look what we have here. 1890s. It became very quickly very popular. But also, if you look to this photo, which is before 1917, and also before, it's with a lot of photos, we are not totally sure. We see most people wearing kente cloth. Now, this is kente. I forgot to bring on so the kente people who have been to West Africa, especially Ghana. Hallo, kom verder.
Ben ik te laat?
Ja.
Ik dacht om 15 uur niet.
Nee. No worries. Locally produced textiles work has a long history. But we also see somebody here wearing, I think it's Tree of Life motif. So, I will now speak just about Ghana. In Ghana, we can go to the next one, using textiles that are produced locally, regionally, all over the world, and bringing that into the ever-changing fashion system. And if there is one place in the world where it matters what you wear, and that you wear well, and that you wear appropriate, and that you look good, and that innovation is at the core of textiles and fashion, I put in this one that also printing, Adinkra, is a very old tradition in Ghana. This one is interesting that it's here in the World Museum. You can see it in the museum. You might see here that this is the Dutch emblem, because the Ashanti and the Dutch were very much collaborating and at times fighting as that meant. At the same time, Bogoron is a resist dyeing technique. So also these techniques that came in, nothing new under the sun. This is used in the making of Malika. The most famous place where Adinkra is made is in Tonso, which is just outside Kumasi. And I think we both have spent there quite some time. Next one. This is some 19th century kente, some of the oldest. It's those textiles woven in strips, then put together to form a whole cloth. There are things to say, that kind of weaving and thinking around design is, you see that throughout West Africa. What is very particular in Ghana is the complexity of the weaving, and there's a lot of technical stuff, but that you can have something like this you can't reproduce mechanically. For centuries, Ghana, people were enslaved in the transatlantic slave trade. People not always realize the biggest barter good are not the guns, but the textiles, especially 18th century. For a long time, it were the textiles from India. And this is, if you read the quantities, everybody on the coast in West Africa was wearing, as part of their ensemble, also Indian textiles and local produced textiles and European textiles. And what do we look today? If anybody look at yourself and just think, where was it produced? It's very hard to wear something that is only coming from one place. It's hard, but we also normally don't like it. But there's another level in which those textiles from elsewhere played a major role within a tradition like kente. Next slide, please. Here, these are some of the oldest, this one, that one, and this one, kente that we still have, 18th century, small museum now in Britain. If we look to the red in these textiles, we did dye analysis, scientific analysis, these are unraveled yarn that is taken from Indian or European cloth. It's something which in a research project I'm now exploring, reused in the local production. And this became really the high end. Some even argue that this is a big importance where kente became different from what was woven in many other places. So, of course, totally off script as usually. So we need the wax print coming to West Africa is part of a very long tradition that is very normal in that part of the world. But it's also common in other parts. Next slide, please. And when we look through the archives and we speak to people and we look what's happening today, textiles that came in, it was not that just everything goes. These ships, these Euroships that came in, they had to know exactly what the demand was in that particular year in that particular port, and otherwise they could go bankrupt. That's how particular the demand in West Africa was, and where changes in fashion, in particular qualities, but also where there's research on this, that what was produced in India was partly directed by African taste, by African consumer demand. And this sampling, this taking from far and local and making it local is something that is continuing. And I just wanted to point out what is sometimes called Obama cloth. This is the former president, not that well beloved these days anymore for some probably good reasons. Here you see a weaver, weaving kente. In this cloth, you get Adinkra comes together, kente comes together, other traditions that I've not spoken, the embroidery traditions that we find all over come together. And where do you think that this one might likely have been? No, maybe not this one, but the majority of this type of cloth, where is it produced today?
Maybe China.
Gujarat. And there's a whole, I just want to say that what I've tried to do is to embed this story of the wax print and to decenter and us to think what, even when we just look historical, where was it made, who, for whom, how that is part of a much wider story, and how the complexities and why therefore it's also so possible that people can have so different perspectives and opposite ideas, and when they can debate and why it's so sometimes controversial. There's a lot of material that people can work with. So, last slide. This is my good friend in Ho. I just wanted to show you all these fashion posters and how they are important. I only want to say African print matters in Ghana. It matters hugely, it matters differently. And all these complex ways I'd like to invite Adwoa, who will tell me much more in depth about it.
Right, thank you very much, Malika, for setting the historical context to this from other countries. So basically what I'm going to do is to delve more into Ghana perspective on this. So I start off with my first slide. So, and as Malika was talking, she spoke about how West Africa has long history of cloth making, whether weaving or using cotton to make clothes. They were not printing in wax, but then there is tie and dye and there is batik, and it was traded across countries and different borders on the West African coast. So bringing in cloth was not so, how you put it, it wasn't unique to Europeans, because the West Africans and Africans have been trading with the East for a very long time before Europeans came in. And they were buying cloth across. And it's also important when people like the post about, is it colonial legacy or it's fashion, is very, how do I put it? It speaks of the ignorance of history in this context, because trade in cloth precedes colonialism way over 100 years, way before the colonial settlers came. They decided to settle in Africa. So when they started the trade, it was more of a trade, and and as Malika said, majority of the commercial goods was in textiles, and it precedes colonialism over 100 years. So when it got accepted into the system, it was way before they decided to settle. So it is important that we understand that it started off as trade. And how did it get its roots in the system? So with time, when it first came, and Malika mentioned this, the quality was lower. Because remember, West Africans were producing cloth, so they knew what it is to have quality cloth. So when it was first introduced, it had low quality. So in order to match up, there has been studies on how it took over 200 years between the Dutch and the British in order to convince West Africans to accept the cloth. So it did not just start, it wasn't, we bring it and you buy, or because they have idea of what a quality cloth is supposed to be, especially in the dye, in the design, what they want it to be. So within that 200 years, it was what we call the textile war between ABC of the British and the Vlisco of the Dutch, in order to please the African markets. And how did they go about it? That's how I call it the co-creation of wax print, of what it is now, and why it is called African print. So the co-creation started with designs. So the designs they were bringing out from Java into the system were not working, because West Africans had a different taste and different designs, different colors. So when these companies started to understand the market of West Africa, most of these wax prints were done in indigo color, because indigo was the color for most fabrics on the West African coast, like the Adwoa of the Nigerians, and then the Benin's had theirs, we had in Mali. These were done mostly in indigo colors. So in order to please the market, they started off with indigo colors. Then the designs have to also reflect things that happen contextually. So you can't just bring design from Java thinking it's going to sell in the market of Africa when they can't even relate to the designs in there. It has to be culturally and socially embedded. It is also the reason why cloth made for Ghana is different from the ones in Nigeria. It is totally different. The one in Ivory Coast as well, because it has to respond to local ideas. And another thing with the co-creation is also naming. So in Ghana, we have a long tradition of let me take kente. If you weave kente, you take it to the village chief or a paramount chief. And one thing about it is you have to name it. If it gets accepted, it has to be named. A form of birth of the cloth into the system. And it's also the same way that when wax prints gets accepted, it has to be named. That is to emphasize this acceptance into our system. So most of these wax prints have names, most of these visco, and to date, many people would want to still wear those with names, not because it's produced by visco, but they also understand the cultural implication of wearing named cloth. That it is what we co-created with these people in terms of design, in terms of color, in terms of our tastes. So if you chance on a whole archive of wax prints in a museum or in archives, what it means is that these were not so it's not like it was produced somewhere. I have quite a number in my presentation. They were produced somewhere and jumped off on a bunch of people in West Africa or in Africa. But what it means is these people, the producers have to come in and understand, learn with the people and understand their preference and produce. So I have a couple of the fabrics and their names. Let me see. Yeah, so it's quite easy. Forgive me because I had to take them out of these more pictures. So this one is called Amasewa. Amasewa is somebody's name, it's a female name. And it was named after somebody's mother or a mother in a society. So that is one. There's another one. This is, these ones are circles. They are circles and they are called abankaba and they are called handcuffs. Because in the local system, it has the image of handcuffs. So that's how it's called. The next one, please. Okay, so you see, this is called wafamemwa. Literally means you think of me as a snail, right? And it's also the design of a snail, but then it means being taken advantage of or being taken for granted. But it's the design of a snail, and that's how it resonates with the people. Yeah, the next one. This is broom, right? And this is locally made broom from palm tree. So when you see it this way, it's a way of, they also understand it. So the next one, I don't know if I have. Okay, so this is akokobata. Akokobata, this is the hen and the children, and with all the eggs. So it's called akokobata, meaning the mother hen and the children around her. Yes. Okay, so I think this is my last slide also. So when we talk of authenticity, and then my question has always been authenticity in terms of origin or production or consumption. Who owns it? Do we even have to own in the first place? Because if we are going for the argument of origin, it is not Dutch, it is Java. So they took the idea from Indonesia and decided to commercialize. But if what is being done in Africa after co-creation, does it then belong to Java? It doesn't, because it's gone through layers of recreation through co-creation. If it's also a matter of authenticity per production, then those who are producing, we are producing quite a raw material here, because we don't wear cloth. You can only wear the cloth after value has been added to it. So you produce the cloth and you ship it to Africa, and then we have people, seamstresses and tailors, who add value to it and make it into clothes. So if you are claiming authenticity from European perspective, or even from China nowadays? Is it the production of the raw material, or is the production of clothes out of it? Who is producing? Then is consumption. If there's no Africa, there is no wax print, because it's not consumed anywhere besides the continent. So Vlisco can claim to be a company because it has market. And the production of these in Asian countries now is not the idea of the Asians. During the structural adjustment program where trade liberalism started, and then that was also the period where Ghanaian president, former president Echampong, also liberalized the trade, because at first there's also the institutionalization where after independence, because it's been accepted, they decided to institutionalize it, build factories to produce locally so that it's no more imported. But then there was also the imports. But what that meant was there was a local production that also served a different group of people because it was cheaper. And then after all these, after the institutionalization, there was also a way of selling where they do what they call the passbook system. So you need a passbook to access the different companies that bring it in. At that time, we had about 5 companies that were bringing in from outside beside the local one. The local one was TUC. So TUC had it. So you need a passbook to go and buy. What that also created was a cartel of just a group of women who could access the passbook, and they were selling at their own prices. So the government abolished the passbook system. So people could, you beside the fact that and you could sell to anybody, people also had a chance to produce their own designs. So that's how people started taking their own design, making their own designs in China, in Turkey, and shipping them to the market. So the idea is, beginning, some would take the designs of the old designs and recreate. But now, day in and out, on weekly basis, you have different designs coming in from China. And these designs, you can trace to the owner of the design, because in the market, they know who brought these designs, because the market women with no high education in design sit down in design and take their designs to China and produce. So the idea has always been, when we talk of, is wax prints authentically African? Is wax prints a colonial legacy? Is it adopted? Is it adapted? It's a complex layer of so many co-creation from different perspectives. And it's important that we acknowledge every stakeholder's stake in this and how it came to be, because I am not being, I'm not talking strictly in the sense that because Africa consume, it is African. I also acknowledge the history behind this and how it was accepted. And yes, in its acceptance, I don't know if it's the, do I have another slide or I skipped that slide? Yes, so in its acceptance, it was accepted in the society because it was affordable. That is one thing. Because woven cloth was expensive. So when it first came, it was quite cheaper. And another thing is, it also gave women access. Women in most West African countries, and then they are along the coast, are matrilineal in kinship. And what that means is it gives women a lot of freedom to trade, to move around. So whether you are married or not, you have capital. So cloth, and then, but before then, mostly when you marry, your husband buys you cloth once a while in a year, they will buy you cloth. But then to have the cloth at your coast means you can actively engage in it, and it also gave the women access to trade in it. So it became part of building capital amongst women. That's also a reason why it was accepted. The fact that it was affordable, became accessible, and then it was also a means of women building wealth. And women have been selling cloth. As much as cloth was part of the trade, before with the Arabs and with the East, it was controlled by the men mostly. But then with the incoming of wax prints, it's being at the coast, and then you don't have to trade like people going all the way to other West African countries to buy cotton cloth, and it was malleable compared to others. You can easily turn it around, and then so it got accepted easily. So like the quote I have here, when say selling cloth is known as business of mothers. Like it became women business, and it's also a means of building wealth. And then yes, so most women in Ghana engaged in this cloth business because at a point when men moved also into cash crop farming, they let this trade, most of these trades, to the women, because for a long time women were engaged in foodstuff, selling foodstuff. Bringing in the wax print became another form of income and building wealth. So essentially what I have shown is that wax print within the Ghanaian context is a co-creation. Ghanaians see it as theirs, or West Africans see it as theirs, because over the years they have contributed into its design, its production, and its consumption. And whether it's done in China or in the Netherlands and imported, the idea is that we have to understand that there are many stakeholders, and our stake and African stake in it is quite high, and it must be acknowledged. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So now we'll transition into the conversation session. So can we just move a couple of the chairs forward?
So how much time do we have, Joaquin?
We have 40 something minutes.
Okay, so that's good. So I wanted to ask you, thank you very much for this this overview, but also it shows exactly your engagement. So I wanted to ask a question to each one of you is, what is your personal stake in this? So Adwoa and Malika.
What's my personal stake in this? Okay, so my PhD has a section on this, and I call that session the colonial gaze, adaptive or adoptive perspective of wax prints. And the idea is that because my mother and my grandmother used to sell cloth, so I wanted to understand the idea of what that means for our society, and the often question of authenticity. Is this authentically African? Actually, I get really, that question really gets on my nerves when people ask, oh, so is this authentically African? There's nothing authentic about anything we do in this world. Everything is appropriated. So I always think, can we breathe a little? So I decided to look into it to find how do we tell the story without skewing it, without making it more Eurocentric in the idea? Because for in 2024, a newsletter to put up wax prints as a colonial legacy, that's really wrong, because it precedes colonialism. That's the first basis for me. It's like the fact that you don't understand that trading precedes colonialism is very difficult for me to also understand where you're coming from. So if you are trading with somebody, then it means there is a buying and there is a selling. So if we can buy and we can sell, then it means there is something in our society that was benefiting from it, and they were also benefiting. So in its adaptive state. So in my thesis, I go ahead to show how it is it is soon in our society. So it started with, because most of the clothes at that time were in wrapper, people were wearing it in wrapper and toga style. That was how it was worn, which is different from how Java was wearing it, I'm sure. So it is a way of adapting it into our society, and it's important that we know that it is not a wholesale adoption, but then it was contextually, and that's why I brought HS cultural authentication. It went through process of being accepted into the society, and it became part of the people. And I wanted to put it out there. Yeah, so that's my statement.
Thank you, Adwoa. Malika.
Yeah, also I was thinking like, oh, you know, when your head goes like a mind map, because I think I do come from in the Netherlands, my grandmother was she taught at the household school, textiles. So for me, always when I was young, textiles is for old people. And then I did an internship here at the museum, and I met some. I was looking for a reason for my master or my afstudeerscriptie, and we wanted to go to Ghana first. I studied in, and she proposed, oh, look at kente cloth. And I thought, no, textile, that's boring. Then I saw it, and this is 30 years. And since then I've been coming to Ghana, and I have been always luckily living with people. I've been dressed a lot, and so textiles and the wax prints started off for me more because we went to the market together, and I was fascinating how you used, I don't know if you know that, if you remember, in the 1990s, you used a piece of newspaper to make a headscarf to make it stiff, and you folded it in. And then gradually, I got sometimes confused, and I realized, hey, these kente cloths, it's all men who make it. And sometimes I was bored to be always working with men. I wanted to work with women. So I also, more professionally, started to be interested in. And then what I realized as a curator, I am a visual storyteller. And I like if people can both connect and then open their ways differently. And that the wax cloth story is really a wonderful way of allowing people to both put their own story and be able to look through the eyes of somebody else and feel connections where they might not think, and see complexities where they think things are simple. That's for me as a curator very important. So the Japanese sari plays in that. And I got very bored with Europe, and that much before that started, just why, so all the stories that I could tell as a curator or write where Europe can become a footnote, is something that excites me. And so it comes together. And sometimes I did a lot of cloth exhibitions in different parts in the east of Ghana as part of my PhD, to see what people were doing and also how they were presented. And in one place, in Dinu, of all places, which is known for its big smuggle in wax prints, the women had, or the group had understood differently. So we had a huge discussion on the textile, on the wax prints. And then, of course, coming from the Netherlands, you hear about Flisco. I grew up not far away from Flisco. So things are coming together, and it's just excited, and it allows me to do great work together with colleagues like Adwoa.
So in your abstract, which is also published for our viewers, you spoke about exhibition making and why such a discussion is important for exhibition making today. Could you both share a few words on what you mean by this discussion and how this discussion can enter into exhibition making.
Okay, so when I heard that there's going to be exhibition on wax prints at the World Museum, I thought, okay, how well can the story be told in 2025 with enough representation from all stakeholders? Because I don't know the plan they had in mind, but in 2025, it will be very awkward to walk into a museum and it's supported by Vlisco and find that the story is all about Vlisco. And I don't know what you're going to tell if you are telling the story from the perspective of Vlisco. How are you going to tell that if you are not including people from Indonesia, if you're not including the consumers? It is very important that we give a trajectory of what wax print is, what it has come to mean, and what it is now. So if we are going to put this out on exhibition, it must have all the stakeholders represented. Give the layers, because it is for our consumption, and we can't think linearly in this point. At this point, we cannot be thinking of how it was taken. Okay, so because it was taken from people who couldn't market it enough, now it is for these people who are able to produce and market. How about the Chinese? How about those in Asia who are also producing now? What's their stake in it? How do we bring all this together? Because if we are going to tell the story of Zara now, Zara as a multinational company, you cannot tell the story of Zara without Bangladesh. Not because there are lots of women and men whose livelihood is based on that, and they are producing this day in and out, running shifts. And you can tell us that because there's a label of Zara on it, then it's from Sweden or no. We need to tell the story as it is and how everybody, because everything is now global. We can say it is okay for some people to outsource, while there's no okay for others to outsource. The fact that production is outsourced out of the continent doesn't mean the people who consume it can't be part. I think an exhibition should give an equal platform of representation of what wax print is in 2025.
Thank you, Adwoa. Malika, what do you think?
Yes, I've been a curator in Leicester for almost 15 years, and a few years curator of an Africa collection in Hamburg. I think textiles in itself and wax cloths very much are wonderful to bring multifocality into the museum. I think it's very important, but also, and that you bring different voices, that you think whose voice is silenced, what are power dynamics, why we represent and we learn about things in the way that we learn about it. Whether that is from personal stories at school, when you're at university, wherever. But also, as curators, we always say the really, really hard thing is if you have to work with academics. First, they think they know it all. And second, they think linear and they love words far too much. Well, no public read. Yeah, 3%. And an exhibition, you sap through it, everybody. So you need to be an associative mind mapper to tell stories in museum, or to invite people to make their own stories. And in exhibitions, you just shape, you direct, you concentrate. And for instance, what I did in Leicester, at one point, ABC Manchester was a lot of British firms came together in ABC Manchester, a lot of Dutch firms in Vlisco, and this in the mid-20th century. You also have a lot of, after African independence, you have a lot of firms in West Africa. GTP voting, and sometimes the one owned the other, and sometimes independent. That's a whole complex economic story. But in the early 2000s, precisely 2005 or 6, no, in 2008 or 7, the production of ABC Manchester went to Akosombo Textiles in Ghana. And they started, still up to date, to promote certain cloths as ABC. That's, how do you tell in a museum, in an exhibition, that story? I managed at that time to collect a textile, which is like here, written ABC Manchester, with a textile ABC Ghana. There you have your story. And that's just one example where you also can tell and you can invite stories that we always said simple language, complex stories, and using all your senses. Even we have to give that to one Dutch person, Mr. Kraamer. When he did his imitation, he tried so hard that for some time this imitation Java, what he called Javanese, he managed even to get the smell of batik from Indonesia. He reproduced that so that the cloth smelled like batik. Can we put that in an exhibition? And we are speaking.
So I want to ask Joaquin, do we have time for one more question and then we open it to the audience, or should we directly go to the audience?
We have 27 minutes, so I think we could.
So should I ask? Okay, so I have this one last question for you with regard to fashion. And so fashion as conscious fashion in Ghana, in West Africa, but also amongst diaspora, African diaspora in the rest of the world. But in general, since we're talking about wax print, so conscious fashion, but also conspicuous consumption or conspicuous fashion. What are your views on that with regard to wax print?
Okay, so with conscious fashion, as I said, wax print has come to be known as African print. So in this 21st century, starting from the 2012 in Ghana, we had a policy called the Friday African Wear. And what that meant, and then Nigeria did it in 2014. That was a Monday and Wednesday. What that meant was that on Fridays, everyone is supposed to wear anything made out of supposed local cloth, being it wax print, and wax print was the major because then that was cheaper and accessible. So we also had companies. This is not just for everybody, but institutions were asked to commission their own wax print from local producers who produce for them. So on Fridays, we wear them. So on the conscious fashion, in order to, in creating identity for one, and also promoting local business and local production, that was instituted. And like someone like me, if I'm to step out to go to work, I'm very conscious that I wear wax print the whole week, literally. I can't wear it here because most of them can't suit this weather. But that's what I wear to work every day. If I'm to show up to teach, if I'm to show up for presentation or anything, I am in my work. It is quite conscious because beside the Friday wear, it became very normal for us to take it to work. And it wasn't just relegated to cultural and social events anymore. Then it permeated workplaces. So since that time, you find the market of wax prints going quite high, and also people wearing it and people being very proud of it. In conspicuous fashion. Recent times, we also have fashion designers coming in. beside the seamstresses and tailors who have always been our producers, there is a new crop of designers who are quite high earning. And these designers are also very conscious in using local fabrics and wax prints for their designs. So they take these wax prints, which can be in, I can buy this and take it to seamstress, but they are going to take the same thing and design it in a way that makes it very conspicuous for the upper class. Because another thing with it is because wax print became cheap, then the upper class thought they couldn't wear it. So that's why it's also the reason why Blisco has markets, because it's for upper class. Then they needed to raise up their prices, tag it to the dollar. It's been tagged to the dollar since independence. It was a way of differentiating it from the locally produced one, which was cheaper. So in order to get it now, and I work with fashion designers because I work in fashion, what they do is, so I know those who work directly with Blisco brand, but there's also one who works with them and told me that she could make some of her clothes in Blisco all right, but it makes it too expensive as much as they are targeting the upper class, because other things that they use in designing comes at a higher cost. Like they will bead it, they will use stones, they will use other designs to make it higher end. So it's either they are using Blisco or they are using the cheaper ones, but then they are also elevating it with these different designs and to make it conspicuous for the upper class. So when you see someone wear it, you see a difference as well. You see a difference when you see one coming from a fashion designer. You see a difference with that of the locally produced, the seamstress or the tailors. There's something about it that you see the difference. So in being conspicuous or being conscious, wax print plays a major role in fashion in West Africa now. Because I've studied Nigerian fashion industry, I studied Ghanaian fashion industry, and I see how current designers are conscious of using wax prints for their designs.
Thank you. Malika?
Yeah, I'm trying to think, maybe I should try to speak a bit more historically. So I want to start with a little story, which I think is very telling. When you go, this was very true in the 20th century and still a little bit true. You take KLM because you want to go to Ghana. And just look what people are wearing in the plane. It is clear cut. Those from Ghana who, after a short time here, go back. Those who have been living longer here but have their roots in Ghana. And those who come here and bring a visit to Ghana. You just look who is dressed best. And it is in that order. Your degree of shabbiness increases very much. Now, to dress well, that is for me always been clear, not just now or 20th century. That is something which matters tremendously in West Africa. And I think I can only repeat what Adwoa was saying, how wax cost plays such a role in that. But even if we look at the and so the conspicuous display, that it matters that you look well. You go to a big event like the many festivals we have, or the weddings and so on. If you can afford it, you will do your best to come out with something new. You will order a new kente cloth. You will try to have the latest fashion in your wax cloth. Or in the way how you combine things. So I think conspicuous display and also conscious fashion, you find it not only in the elite, it's through every section of society. I worked a lot with seamstress, in a regional capital and some of the villages and looked at the co-creation, the fashion co-creation with those fashion posters, and how you choose which wax cloth or other textiles, and how you play and you adjust, but you put your own twist to it. And so it's an absolutely co-creation between the designer, the seamstress, the fashion poster, and the consumer. Maybe even more than those who are more in the high end, who are more trained within that system, where the person who in the fashion schools, as we have them in Ghana or in other parts. So the process works different in different sections in society, but it's all there, that co-creation, conspicuous display, that it matters, that you're conscious what you're doing, plays a huge importance.
So I would like to thank everybody here, and especially you, Adwoa and Malika, for this conversation. All of you here for coming here and being part of this conversation. I have one little thought that I thought we will leave with. It's a question which has been in my mind ever since the Dakar visit with the sampling books. I know that it's a much bigger question than this conversation can handle. It's a question of who owns the archive? What are we to do with the archives that are there, with companies, with the state in museums, and who should own them? So that's something that we still grapple with as researchers and museum professionals. How do designers get their archives? How do companies hold on to them or let go of them? These are some questions that we are left with. So thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you.